Um, I'm going to call this meeting to order, and I'd like to, if possible, it doesn't look like it's going to be necessary at all, but I'd like to establish a few ground rules. At the microphone, when you speak from the audience and making comments, please state your name and your address, similar to how City Council operates. And also, please, we are very loath to censor anyone's comments, but please try to keep them to the point and productive, and we will try to do the best we can to follow along with the points and the topics being made and give everybody as much time as it takes to have a discussion. I wanted to briefly give the TV audience and anyone interested who doesn't know what the Utilities Commission does a brief background into what we are. We are a citizens board. We do citizens advisory responsibilities to the City Council on 3 enterprises. The concept of enterprises is that they are self-supporting, non-tax funded enterprises within the city. So budgets and everything else are totally contained in the responsibility of those enterprises, and mistakes and other phenomena are also contained in that. I'd like to start with a little bit of history, because this is a topic that has to do specifically with water, value of water, relative value of water. So being a history guy, I'll do a little brief history. Presume that you are getting ready to move to the west from the east in the 1840s, which was the period of considerable migration. And you had to make a choice between taking grandma's piano that has been in the family for quite some time, or taking an extra barrel of water with you. And your migration route was likely to be the Oregon Trail, which essentially paralleled the Platte River, or the Santa Fe Trail, which very much paralleled the Arkansas River. And God forbid that for some reason you got to that river and it was dry and you had to dig a hole to find water, not knowing whether you were actually going to find it or not. And you would be in a position where you wished you'd have brought that second barrel of water. That's a little bit of the position where we are when it comes to water and city council and long-range water planning. We don't want to put the city of Loveland in a position where we didn't bring the second barrel of water. I would just throw out some terms here, because this is a conflict of the relative value of water. We're having a difficulty on a policy decision that has to do with the relative value of water. Not all water is equal. It's not created equal. Some of the terms that make it difficult are growth will pay its own way. Growth will pay its own way. That is a city policy that we are expected to live within. Storage is a necessity to be able to develop the ability to provide a city the toilets, the sinks, the bathtubs, everything that you use, water 24 hours a day, every day of the week, all year long. One of the concepts I also think is important, if you find yourself digging a hole, the first thing you do is stop digging. The policy, the unfortunate nature of the policy that we have had to evolve since approximately 2000 has to do with exactly that concept, and then who gets damaged over it. Many farmers and other water rights owners didn't build storage because it takes a heck of a lot of resources and a lot of engineering, certainly a lot of cash, to build storage. And much of the conflict we have in here today about the policy has to do with storage. And that's really all I have to say. I thank you very much for being here. This has been, I've been on this commission since, as far as I know, the beginning of the awareness that the city had to change some of its water dedication policies relative to growth, and it has been an extremely difficult and heart-wrenching subject, because we do change a policy that material affects some of our friends and neighbors, and we don't take the responsibility lightly. So anyway, I'd like to open this up to the city staff to put on a presentation for everyone here.
Thank you, Dave. My name is Larry Howard. I'm the Senior Civil Engineer for Water Resources for the City of Loveland. And just wanted to take only a moment here to express some of my thoughts about where we stand on water resources planning in Loveland. I've been involved in this process for many years for the city, along with many of the Utilities Commission members. And I think we all recognize that we benefit greatly today from the foresight and the planning that went into creating Loveland's water supplies by those who've gone before us. And now it's our turn as we look ahead. And certainly we view that as staff here, and I'm sure as a commission, as a great responsibility, and one that we're proud to be involved in. Today, our staff presentation will provide a brief history and go into some of the details of some of the recent planning that's occurred over the last approximately year and a half, and lays out some of the things that we've discovered about our water supply and look at some of our projections. And to do that for us today will be Greg Dewey, our civil engineer in water resources.
Thank you, Larry. And thank you, Commission. I'm privileged to be able to give you this brief presentation. It's approximately 20 minutes in length. I plan to move through things fairly quickly because a lot of this is an overview. If you do have any specific questions, there'll be time at the end. So if you don't mind, please hold your questions until the end, and I'll be happy to answer them on my part of this presentation today. Today we'll be talking about the raw water master plan. As Larry said, there's some options to close what we call a 2,600 acre-foot gap. We'll be talking about the water bank summary. Scott Bray has introduced an alternate proposal. We'll discuss that. City Council has also asked other questions, so we'll address those. And then we'll talk about a schedule of remaining public meetings. Now, this is a chart that many of you are familiar with. It shows, oops. Okay, so this is a chart that many of you are familiar with, and this is, in blue, is the previous and projected water demand for the city. In red, this line shows what we continue to consider to be our firm yield. And as you can see, we're in good shape for quite a bit of time into the future, but at some point, these lines cross, and that means that unless we do something different with our supplies, we're not going to be able to meet the future demand. So some of the alternates that were analyzed in the raw water master plan include structural changes as well as policy changes and acquiring different types of water. Out of that came some recommendations to continue to use drought planning, 1 in 100 year as the drought of significance. We use Spronk Water Engineers and their model to take a look at some of these policies, and you'll see how that plays into some of the future recommendations. Specifically, on the policies, we were looking at different types of water the city accepts. On CBT, we currently accept that. Now, I need to point out that in the bold, there are two numbers, 50% on CBT and 5% on cash in lieu. These are some factors that were considered by council at a study session, and they suggested that we change them to these numbers. This means that 50% of every raw water payment would need to be made using CBT or cash. As far as cash in lieu, we base that on the market price of CBT water, and we are advocating a 5% increase to the market price to allow staff to do some of the administration of getting that water into the city's portfolio. Regarding the ditch shares, some of the other policies here are to look at the credits that were determined by SWE or Spronk Water Engineers in their report. We also have a storage fee that's required, and then there's a new thing called allowing firm credits, and I will show you how that plays out in this next table. This is a list of the ditches that the city has historically accepted into the city water bank. Now, these are the fees that were implemented back in 2006. These are the average credits that we're recommending. These are slightly different than what was developed back then. They may have changed by 1/100th or 1/10th of an acre foot. Then over here is a new column that we're calling firm credit without storage fee. This is a credit that a person who has a share in this ditch would get for their development if they did not want to pay the storage fee. And that's a new policy that we're recommending at this time. Some of the other recommendations that were in the report discuss how we look at storage upstream and down, and look at some other operational changes to see if we can enhance our yield. Now, I want to talk about what we call the 2610 gap. That's that point in the future where the demand exceeds the supply. And there's some different options to close that gap. One is to purchase CBT, another is accept cash in lieu, native water without a storage fee, or native water dedications with a storage fee. And I want to go into a little more detail on the storage fee itself. This is a chart that staff developed, and it shows some of the thinking that went on to develop the policy that was implemented in 2006. The title has the words cost parity, and what this meant was that we wanted to show somebody who was developing in Loveland that we wanted to keep their costs the same. And so if they had CBT water, the market at that time was about $11,000 per unit, or about $11,000 per acre foot in our minds. Then when you add we were estimating that the native water was approximately worth $5,000 an acre foot. And then we added a storage fee that would help with this, so that the total dedication would be approximately the same as if somebody were dedicating CBT water. Now, if we fast forward to 2012, you can see that the CBT market has dropped a little bit. We're at around $8,000 per unit or acre foot. And the storage fee is still approximately at the $6,000, so we're estimating that the native water is approximately at $2,000 per acre foot. Now I wanted to talk a little bit about the estimated cost to develop an acre foot of firm yield. With CBT water, it's already stored, and so we consider it firm. The native water, though, requires storage, and to build it, it's going to take more than the $6,000 storage fee. In this estimate, back in 2006, we were estimating the total to be around $19,500. So you can see that on this chart, the storage fee that was being collected was only approximating 1/3 of the total cost of an acre foot of storage, or firm yield, I should say. If you fast forward to 2012, the CBT price has dropped, but storage has increased, and the price for storage has increased. But this is meant to mean that the storage fee that's being collected by the city is merely a portion of what it would take to build actual storage. I'd like to take a minute just to describe what the water bank is. Currently, it's a subset of the city's water rights portfolio. The city has several different water rights, but the water bank was a mechanism to help transition the local water rights from the owners to the city. And the owners are people who are committed to use water for development in Loveland. In fact, many of them are people who have continued to live in the area and raise their families and for many generations. The city then takes the water that these people dedicate to the city through water court and bears the cost for the money and time involved. An ancillary benefit to the owners is that the water bank created a market for development credits. So just in highlights, there's an agreement that a person who owns water rights enters into an agreement with the city. When the credit is used, the value is determined and the native raw water storage fee in effect at that time is also charged. We believe the treatment of the water bank account holders has been equitable. The storage fee was not implemented until 1995, so the accounts prior to that were grandfathered with no fee. There was notice given to people about increased fees and they could have withdrawn the water prior to 2005. And then the fees that are in place now were implemented over a series of 3 years and have remained unchanged since 2008. What's in the water bank? Well, the water bank consists of about 3,700 acre feet in approximately 350 accounts. The majority of these accounts don't require any kind of a storage fee. However, there are approximately 1,200 acre feet in 44 accounts where the storage fee is a factor. Now, this is a slide that Scott Bray had presented at the January 17th, 2012 City Council meeting. And I'm just going to briefly go over this, but I want to assure Scott that I'm not going to try not to go into too much detail here because I know that he'll want to come up and talk about it himself. But in this example chart, I should say, the cash in lieu price was up here, and you can see that it's actually about the price of what a CBT unit is at that time. If you take the storage fee into account, the storage fee averages $6,000 per acre foot on each ditch, but it's a little different for each ditch. You subtract that off, the difference gives you a much smaller number. And the idea was that this might be what the actual water rights are worth since that storage fee was implemented. So Scott had proposed a structure for the storage fee at the January 17th, 2012 meeting. And his idea was to roll back the present storage fee to the dates the native water rights were deposited into the city water bank. So prior to 1995, no storage fee would be charged. From 1995 to the end of 2005, the minimal storage fee of approximately $475 would be in effect. But then at 2006, 2007, 2008, the dates when the storage fees were escalated, those fees would have been locked in at what those steps were. So if a person deposited water at that time, they would be locked in at that particular storage fee and not have to worry about a fluctuation. Now this is staff's understanding, and our understanding was that this proposal was a request for relief because of the economic downturn we've experienced since 2008. The City Council asked staff to look at the fiscal impact of Scott Bray's proposal. So if we look at the amount of storage fee that would be collected using the current values on those accounts, if all of those accounts were used to meet water requirements, $5.9 million would be collected. Conversely, if the storage fee was collected using Scott Bray's proposed policy, the amount collected by the city would be $2.8 million. So the difference is $3.1 million that would have to be made up somewhere. A secondary impact that was mentioned and it was not part of Scott Bray's original proposal, but is something that seemed to be a lingering question that staff felt needed to be answered was, what about the people who've already paid? People who would have benefited from this policy but paid the storage fees as they had to when they dedicated the water for development. We look at this scenario, that means that they paid approximately $900,000. The storage fee they would have had to pay was less, about a third of that. So then $600,000 would need to be reimbursed from the city ratepayers. So if you add the $3.1 million and the $0.6 million, the total negative impact to the ratepayers would be $3.7 million, where that money would come from. Some additional considerations of the proposal were how much does the storage fee really contribute to the amount of storage required? Now, previously I said that on a firm yield basis, it's about a third of the cost. But if we take a look at an actual site that the city has looked at, a feasible location, and the estimated cost to build at that location, a 7,000 acre-foot reservoir, then the storage fee that's collected under Scott's proposed policy represents approximately 7% of that total cost, meaning that the other 93% would need to come from somewhere else. Now, this is just a brief history lesson. I wanted to go back in time to 2005 and talk about what happened with City Council at that time. November 15th, 2005, the Council adopted the Raw Water Master Plan, and it also unanimously approved an ordinance implementing a lot of the policy changes by putting those into the municipal code. There was a motion to insert a grandfather provision for storage fees on water bank deposits prior to September 20th, 2005, which was considered by council, but it did not pass, and only councilors Brown and Clark supported this amendment. Now, coming forward again to 2012, we wanted to address some of City Council's questions and comments that came up at the January 17th, 2012 meeting. The initial question was, what is the impact of Scott Bray's proposal? And I've shown you that it could be $3.1 million to $3.7 million. Other questions following this discussion were, what if the city were to buy out the water bank credits that are being affected by this? And we've done some math. We've estimated that it could be anywhere from $2.5 million to $8.4 million for the city to buy out those credits. The third question that was asked was, what about returning the water that was already included in decrees? Because even though that these have not been, a lot of the water has not been used for development, the city has taken the water through water court and changed the use of the water and has incurred time and money expenses to do that. Now, we would estimate that in order to return the water would be approximately a $1.5 million cost, and that's just a guess for the legal and engineering for a typical court case. However, there's considerable risk estimated to reopen the decree, and our legal counsel has strongly recommended against this option. In fact, the risk is perhaps too costly to calculate at this time. Now, the schedule for the remaining public meetings today is April 4th, 2012. We're here at Council Chambers. We'll be at the Construction Advisory Board meeting on April 25th. Prior to that, there's another Loveland Utilities Commission meeting we'll be discussing this at. In May, there's another Loveland Utilities Commission meeting we'll be discussing this at, getting ready to go to council on June 5th and then also June 19th. And with that, that concludes my presentation. I would invite you to ask me any questions, to clarify anything I've said, or to elaborate on anything in my particular part of the presentation.
Commissioners, do you have questions? We've pretty much seen this before. Any elaborations, any questions?
Looking back on your statement about the impact of offering a water bank credit buyout, and you have that figure, potential cost of $2.5 million to $8.4 million. Why such a variance? Would that depend on how much water was bought out?
No, this is assuming that all of the water is bought out, so all 1,200 acre feet approximately is bought out. But the difference between the 2.5 and the 8.4 is 5.9 million, which I showed on a previous slide. That's the amount of storage fees the city would not collect. So the city would need to make up that 5.9 million by either rates or bonding or some other finance option. So it's kind of a foregone cost.
So why wouldn't the impact just be 8.4 million instead of having that 2.5 million? I still don't understand it.
It depends on how you look at it. If you're looking at a true direct cost, it would be the 2.5, but if you also consider the foregone cost, then it would take you up to the 8.4. So,
yeah, thank you.
Greg, does that take into consideration the cost of taking it through water court and that? Is that where the 8 something comes in?
no, the actual cost to water court was borne by the city and isn't part of this scenario. So that's a sunk cost that the city would have. But then again, the city would have another cost to take it back out of, through the water court, take it back out of our decrees. So there are some additional costs. This was just a very rough estimate.
Could you elaborate a little bit on the risk for our audience here of reopening the decree?
I'm going to turn that over to Larry.
I've been in contact with our legal counsel that has assisted us for a number of years, quite a few years, as we've gone through the water court process and changed the type of use to municipal use. And after you get through the process, what I'm told is that to take water back out of that decree does not remove the new terms and conditions that have been given to that water in the decree. And there are two things that probably would have to happen. The city would, number one, have to go to the water court and apply there to amend the application or to amend the decree itself with a new application, decreasing the amount of water that we have in the decree itself. The secondary impact there is what might happen to it as the water then left and went back to the previous owners. And it's not at all clear that the previous use of the water in the same way it had occurred historically would be available. It would be colored, if you want to think of it that way, by restrictions that have been placed on it in the city's decree.
So potentially there's a risk not only to the city but also to the owner of the water if it were returned.
That's what I understand from council. That's right. There'd be risk to the city and risk then possibly to the owners that would be taking it back. Anytime, too, just as an added thought, and I don't know how you would quantify this, but anytime a decree is opened up for an amendment or something, there's risk that things that you haven't anticipated may come up. So certain objections, you may find the entire decree subjected to terms and conditions that may be more negative than the ones you began with, and it's just an inherent risk in going to the water court.
I'd like to make a couple of clarifications just for hopefully for the folks who are watching this on the Access Channel. CBT stands for Colorado Big Thompson Project, and that is a trans-mountain diversion consisting primarily of 4 reservoirs on the western slope that store water for many of the entities, Loveland included. But it represents planning, long years of construction and planning, and foresight, and then not inconsiderable problems just to manage, but the benefit is, as was explained before, it's stored. When we talk about water court, we are talking about a very special court in Colorado whose job it is to interpret and analyze the right to use water. No one owns water. You only have the right to use it, and you have to have a purpose and need, so its defining term is beneficial use. So you have to analyze that, and then if you convert it from one type of beneficial use, like agriculture, which historically much of our water in our ditches is provided, to the use of a municipality, then the water court supervises this and analyzes, first off, that you're not hoarding it, and second off, that you have the right to use it the way is consistent with very complicated Colorado water law. So I just thought that the audience might be interested in those terms, because it's a fascinating subject just to see what water courts do. And it's very slow, very complicated, very engineering-oriented process that has taken the city of Loveland considerable time after the water was deposited in the water bank to get converted. And now, if the to give the water back doesn't change the degree of its use. And I'm not too sure just exactly how many of the folks who would consider that an option have thought out what it's like to hire their own attorneys and go back through and change the use of the water. Certainly, again, subjects the city to considerable issues. But when the city did this in the first place, one of the issues was all the objectors. Now, you have to answer the objections. You have to make your process legitimate. So going in the reverse direction is likely to be the same process and could be considerably more expensive in total. Anyway, Randy?
Could I ask you a question on the number in, it's the slide that says additional consideration of Scott's raised proposal, the reservoir cost perspective? And my question is, it shows the total storage fee collected under Scott's proposal is $3.7 million. And I'm looking at the two slides prior where that fee appears to be $2.8 million. So I guess I'm wondering where the 3.7 came from.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that's a typo. So if that's 2.8 million, then that brings the percentage down even further.
And if I understand it right, that 2.8 would also be reduced by the 0.6 million reimbursement you'd pay to the folks that paid that prior fee, so it would be 2.2 million, is that correct?
Yeah, it's getting smaller.
Just want to make sure I had the numbers correct.
Okay. Any other questions from the commission? We're going to leave staff available to answer questions, and we'd like to have the commenters, on whomever they are, please come up, and if you'd like some clarification, please ask, and otherwise, please come up and state your case.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, my name is Steve Fancher. I live at 2001 Francis Drive in Loveland, Colorado. I've lived there an awfully long time. I'm here to support Mr. Bray's proposal on the rollback of storage fees, and I think there's 2 or 3 salient points that I'd like to bring up here. The first point is, when the people deposited water in the water bank, the city had a policy in place, and I think it was reasonable for those people that deposited the water to assume that that policy was going to continue. Now, the staff will say they signed a contract that allowed the staff to change this, but in truth, it hadn't been changed for 20 or 30 years. And it was reasonable and for them to depend on the city's word and the city's policy at that time. And I think it's important that maybe us as citizens can depend on the city's word and what the city says at any certain time. The second salient point I'd like to bring up is beneficial use. The city has a beneficial use of the water since the time it was deposited in the water bank. And as an example, I'd like to use Loveland Ready Mix deposited some water in the water bank in 1978 or 79. We have not used the credits for 30 years. The city has diverted that water. I'm guessing every year, but maybe 2002, for 30 years. They've had a beneficial use of that water virtually forever. And they've had beneficial use of everything in the water bank for a certain number of years. The third thing I'd like to bring out is, in the long run, the policy you're trying to put together, you want a balance of native water rights, of CBT, of western slope water, that blends together to, at least on paper, deliver the 100-year yield that you need. So I'm going to venture a guess that the city hasn't gotten very many native water rights since they instigated the policy of the storage fees. It virtually makes the native water rights worthless. If you got CBT water, take them to Greeley, some other place, you know, where the other cities don't have these policies. And I'd like to just enter into a discussion of, you know, growth pays its own way, who should pay for this, who paid for the CBT storage. Well, the government got a long-term loan, and the users of the CBT project paid for it over many, many years. I mean, when my family moved here, we were working on the CBT project in 1952. The water owners didn't pay for that project. The government paid for that project. It was a long-term loan, and eventually the users that got the beneficial use of the water paid for it. Who's going to pay for the Windy Gap and the Chimney Hollow storage project? Well, you know who's going to pay for it. The city's going to borrow that money on a long-term bond or loan, and the eventual users who get the beneficial use of the water are going to pay for it. So the question is, what is fair for the, that's another question here that I'm bringing up, that what is fair for the native water rights that sooner or later you're going to want? So that's one thing. And I'd like to make just a couple comments about, now this, please be advised, this is strictly my opinion, and I've voiced these before. But alternative supplies, I think you need an increased participation in the Windy Gap project. Perfect place to get an alternative supply, although the citizens of Loveland will be paying for that. And I think you need to acquire more native water rights, because that's how you get the blend of water rights in a dry year. And then I'd like to make a comment on page 3 about, and I've mentioned this before, about the CBT yield. In 2002, CBT yielded 0.8 acre feet. And the last yield curve I saw from Spronk showed a firm credit of 0.8 acre feet. So there seems to be an inconsistency in the policy, to me at least, of giving 1.0 acre feet and given a higher priority for CBT water. Any questions? Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
My name is Scott Bray. I live at 2586 Eldorado Springs Drive, and this is my proposal. And I've spoken to this group before, so you're not going to hear anything new from me. The only thing I would like to point out, and that is there's a lot of discussion regarding the taking these water rights, going back to water court and extracting them from the decree, and then who knows what happens to them. That was never my intention when I first spoke at City Council back in January, I believe. My comment to the City Council at that time was that the water bank isn't a bank like we normally feel or have as a definition for a bank, that you deposit something and then you take it back out when you want to. The water bank, obviously, because of the decree and what it creates for that water, is a fixed deposit. It's not a readily interchangeable deposit. I can't write a check and take some money out or take some water out and use it wherever. And so when I made the comment to the City Council that you can't take the water rights that have been deposited out, that was made from many years ago when I think I talked to somebody at staff that said, you know, well, why can't we take our water rights out? And the comment was, well, they go through the decree. And their answer wasn't that you couldn't, but the answer was that you may be able to, but probably not. So, and then I think somebody on council, and I don't know who that was, said, well, we need to look into this. My proposal is not that everybody that has water in the water bank ask for it to be taken out and go back to court and do that. That's not my intention at all. My intention in this proposal really is based on the fairness of the water fee, the storage fee that is presently in place, the economic conditions that we're all faced with development, and the fact that I think the water rights, the people that own the water rights, as maybe Steve Fancher alluded to, is an extremely small group. There's been the buzzword since 1983 when we first established the capital expansion fee program, which I think the city is in the process of reevaluating or discussing right now. And we were one of the first in the nation to go to that sort of a provision to have newcomers buy into the city's infrastructure, if you want to call it that, whether it be parks and recreation, streets, utilities, electric. If they're new here, that was provided by somebody else that was here before them, and so if you're a new person, you pay into this fee so we can continue to upgrade it, maintain it. And the buzzword at that time, and it still remains that way, is that development pay its own way. And I've said this many times. I'm a developer, and I know of nothing that I've received from the city that helped me pay the cost of my development for my development only. I put in the water lines, I pay for that. I put in the sewer lines, I pay for that. I put in the concrete, curb and gutter, thanks to Steve Fancher's company. I put in the pavement. I do all the overlot grading. I do everything there is to do in that development so I can sell a lot. And then in turn, I have a 2-year warranty on that before I turn it over to the city. I don't charge the city anything for that. And I make sure that when they take it over, that it complies with their specifications and that it is in working order. So, and the city has not paid me a dime for that pleasure of paying that money. The only thing that the city does provide in maybe some relief to the developer would be the oversizing of any of the utilities that I put in, be it streets, could be electrical lines, like 3-phase, could be oversized water lines, and that would be for future development that's going up the road or down the road from where I'm located. So my development may require a 6-inch water line to be run through it, but because there's growth beyond my development, the city may come back in and say, let's put in a 10-inch line through your development, Scott, and in turn for that, I pay for the 6 inches, they pay for the 4 inches. That's part of the CEF program, the capital expansion fees. So getting back to the storage fees regarding my proposal is the developers don't pay for this storage fee that's been enacted against native ditch rights. The developers, if I go out and develop a piece of ground, I'm going to pay the price per acre foot. That's the market price. Has nothing to do with the storage fees. So if I buy a Loudon ditch share from whoever, all that person's going to get for that share is what you saw up on the sheet, the cash in lieu of price. And the share owner, the person that owns that, not the developer, is going to pay that storage fee back to the city. So the burden of this falls on such a minute number of people compared to the benefit of the city, of which, again, Steve, I thought, made a very clear comment on how these big projects are paid for. They're not paid for by individuals. They're paid for by groups, cities, municipalities. And, excuse me, and in this case, it's obviously that the majority of this will also be paid by the city, with the exception of the small portion that they've enacted for the storage rights. I would really prefer that the storage rights go away, but I didn't have the courage to put that in my proposal. I didn't want to have everybody throwing rocks at me, so I came up with what I thought was at least fair for the knowledge that the people had at the time that the storage rights were enacted. But I wouldn't mind adding that to my proposal if that would be possible. So again, I just want to make sure that we don't get caught up in this legal wrangling of water courts and things like that. That's not what I'm after at all. I have no intention of pulling my water out of the water bank and trying to get it back in my name or whatever form that would come back in. Doesn't sound like it'd be a very good way to do it. So that was strictly a question that a counselor had, and they were trying to answer it in that way. So, okay.
Thank you, Scott. Would you, would Commission like to ask Scott any questions?
Yes.
How much water do you have in the bank right now?
That is affected by this. I've got 3.57 shares of Loudon ditch, and that amounts to 40-some acre feet, 43 or 4 acre feet, something like that. So, and that actually, that water was put in 2006. And I might interject too, you have to look at it from a developer standpoint. Usually you don't go out and buy water until you think you have a need to use it. I mean, we're not in the business of owning water rights, and so and some of the water that I bought, I thought I was going to be able to use for raw water irrigation. And one of my developments, as it turned out, was not, it wouldn't have been feasible for the cost to do the infrastructure for that, so I just left the water in the water bank. But you usually go out and buy the water at the time that you're going to need it. And so I had bought this water prior to 2006, actually, but when this started, when these storage fees came into effect, I thought I needed some of that water for a project, so I put that water in there at that time, and if I could have had an opportunity to sell the balance of it, I would have done it. But as the market turned and went south, you end up with no value or nobody interested in buying it, so you hold on to it until such time as you are able to use it. And so that's how my water got there. And I don't know about other people. But I think what I'm saying, there's a little, not a little bit, a lot of truth to that, because if you see this, I gave you a chart when I first presented this to council that showed water coming into the water bank at different years and water going out, and it shows that usually that water was put in there that year that it was also going out. And then the water that's in there now, again, I'm not sure why that's still there and why that person never sold it. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Just a clarification, Scott, when you say you put the water in 2006, that's after the time the city adopted this step storage?
Yeah, 2005 is, or the January of 2006 is when the first 1/3 fee went into effect. Okay. And the city, I mean, I have to give you the city credit. I mean, they tried to work with the people that had these water rights by staging it instead of implementing that fee in 1 year and saying, here it is, you know, you pay the $6,800 or whatever. They said, well, we'll do 1/3 in 2006 and 1/3 in 2007 and so forth. And we all thought, well, that's probably as fair a deal as we're going to get, but we also didn't see this downturn, and the city didn't see the downturn, and so we ended up not being able to use that water as quickly as we thought we could. And I think that's where we got stuck, and that's where, from what Steve said, you know, you don't have anybody putting any water in the water bank now at these storage fees cost, because it's not worth it. You can't afford to do it. So, okay. And there's the other restrictions on these native rights that the city's implemented, and I don't know when that started, where you could only put in 60% of native and 40%.
That was at the same time.
Same time? Okay. So, you know, they were starting to clamp down and try to restrict the amount of water coming in to the city from the native ditch rights by saying, you just can't give us all native ditch rights. We don't want that. We want only a certain percentage of what is required to be native ditch rights. And in one of the proposals that the city has in front of you, or you have in front of the city, is even taking that down further to 50%. So the ditch rights are getting squeezed on both ends. For me to sell my native ditch rights, I've got to have a complementary amount of either credit in another form, either CBT or some sort of cash in lieu of price or city water bank credits, if I'm going to also give them my native water rights. I can't just give it all to the city in one lump sum. So it makes it difficult when you own native water rights to balance, because if I get a call from a party that wants to buy water rights, you know, I would like to sell all my native water rights to that person, but if he doesn't have other rights to go with it, I can't sell him all that. Does that make sense? Does that?
No, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. So it's, you know, I just think that the native ditch right holders in the water bank are really having a difficult time with the city policies.
Would you disagree with the staff's analysis that the storage fee makes your water rights roughly the same cost as CBT?
Well, they did change it in there. Are you talking about a specific slide?
Well, I think the rationale was that the storage fee, since it didn't recover anything close to what the cost of storage actually was, did roughly approximate what someone would pay for CBT, $8,000 per acre foot.
Right.
That storage fee, sort of on an average basis across the board, imposed on the ditch shares would make that a roughly equivalent cost. You could buy ditch shares for $2,000 an acre feet, plus you pay the $6,000 storage fee, and you're paying $8,000 for.
Right.
Is that roughly approximate? Or?
Well, I mean, it's true if you were buying water today, but the water that's in the water bank went back in the water bank in years past. And so that price for that water years past was much higher than maybe what it is today. So, and they corrected their slide to show it 2012, but it's not, because it's not a market price. The market price only applies to your CBT water, if you want, because that's what everybody uses for their benchmark is CBT value. That's what the city does in establishing their cash in lieu of. So at that point, that is a market. That fluctuates on the buyer buying and the seller selling at an agreeable price. But what doesn't fluctuate, what is not a market, is the fixed storage fee. That's just fixed. So you got market conditions bumping up against a fixed price. And so when that market condition comes down and that fixed price stays where it is, you know, that squeezes whatever amount of money that may go to the owner of that right down to, depends on what the cash in lieu of price is and what the storage fee for that ditch is, which I think on that one sheet it showed you. So, you know, if you could buy a native water right today at $2,000, that'd be great. I don't know of anybody that's willing to sell that and give it to the city in order to pay that. I mean, I shouldn't say that. I've not been out there looking at water, so maybe there are people out there.
But isn't that problem you're talking about, the change in the value of the water when you put it in compared to now? That also applies to people that put CBT in there. I mean, maybe somebody paid $14,000 for CBT, and today it's only worth $8,000.
No doubt about it.
So I'm not sure I see the distinction that you're.
CBT, but our water rights were going for more. When I would sell an acre foot of native water rights, I was selling it at the CBT prices. So I had that same advantage. Okay? So because I was.
But if the city said, okay, Scott, you're right, this is hard because of the change in the economic conditions. That argument equally applies to people that put CBT in or cash in lieu, paying what CBT was worth back then.
Absolutely. So, but again, but my water's come down, but you're charging me $6,000 or $8,000 for that storage fee. Okay? So,
Yeah, what you're saying.
yeah. So that's where the inequity lies. If that storage fee was floating with market value, then maybe there's a argument on the city side to leave things as they are. But that, number one, is not the case. I think it'd be very difficult to enforce or figure out anyhow. And so that I didn't want to make this complicated. I just wanted to, it's complicated enough, like Dave Snyder said. Water is so complicated that nobody understands it very well. And so, but that's why I made my proposal the way I did. It's just, these were the facts that we had at the time. Let's look at that. And I know it's not for you to decide, but it's for the city council to decide, and that's why I made my proposal. But I made it through the proper channels of the LUC, even though I was at city council without permission to be there. And they graciously gave me the floor. So, but I just felt this needed to be presented. So, okay.
I'd like to, while you're there, I'd like to just ask a couple of questions, Scott. This whole thing, of course, has been so difficult and painful for all of us. You and I have been friends since
way too
before
long.
High school.
Way too long.
And Steve and I have been friends. He certainly supported me when I ran for council.
And so did I.
And I appreciate all that. Yes, you did. And I appreciate all that because we are friends and neighbors. And this whole thing, and I will show the TV audience this little critter. This is called the Raw Water Supply Yield Analysis for the City of Loveland. This was commissioned to try to understand the value, the relative value to the City of Loveland for water. And this is the one from 2004 and the process we went through. And I don't want anybody to think, you or anyone else, that there's not been a lot of agony over this, to know that you take people's expectations of the value of their portfolio and you essentially trash it because you found out that the city's policy has just been off base. The city found out about this policy and analyzed it before it got to the Utilities Commission. But since early on, and certainly with the aggravation of the drought and the needs to follow council policy of providing water in a 1 in 100 year drought, which is at its even itself is a very complicated concept to deal with catastrophes. It's the deal what happens when the Arkansas River is dry and your water barrel is sitting in St. Louis. So the idea again gets to be, as this, what we did to everyone who owned native water, and was not an unkind or unthoughtful thing, I don't think, and I don't think it was dumb, but it certainly was revolutionary. It was not how we'd like to do things in an evolutionary way. It was revolutionary. We took the whole value system for those native water rights and we quantified them to the city's interest. That is actually what our commission's job is to do, is to look after those 70,000 customers out there and try to figure out how to get them their water and get it to them at a price that is practical. And also to follow council directives, as you've acknowledged, the growth paying its own ways and other things. And I'm very sympathetic, I'm a businessman too, of the overhead cost of being a developer. It has become such a large financial burden. Having said all that, this time as we've gone through this process, and of course this is just evolution on what we started back in 2002, We've come up with the concept, at least, of not charging the storage fee, but giving a straight firm yield credit on the water. It's not pretty, but it still pretty accurately reflects what we have seen in how native water does, in fact, have to be stored to be able to provide it 24/7, 365. And that is a cost to the citizens. So I guess ultimately the question is going to become, with council and with us and everything else, if you put it, I would just suggest if you put it to an initiative, how would this be voted on by the customers of the enterprise? Because the enterprise has got to be self-supporting. If it's made a mistake, it's honor bound to correct it, even if it's ugly, and even if it's, and I'm not saying that everything's 100% right, but I was very much a skeptic to make sure that this model did what it was supposed to do, and that we analyzed it, because I've been very sympathetic, again, with my friends watching their water turn into buggy whips. Now, the last thing I want to say about that is your water is not useless. It's useless for construction development, business development. There's still one heck of a lot of crops out there and agriculture that still has use for native water. Now, unfortunately, yours doesn't fit that definition because of the water court, and I certainly know that. So I'm wondering, though, how do you feel about where we've gone with trying to address the storage fees, make them an optional thing, but give you firm yield credit on the water, because we are going to have to build a $400 million reservoir to put it in.
400 million?
When we've studied water, the reservoirs, our mountain reservoirs, we have seen 400 million, 390 million. We have seen 280 million. It's all relative to where you site it and where, but that's not going to get cheaper over time.
No. Well, if that is the case, if it is a $400 million project, then this little $2 or $3 million that you wanted to charge the people that own the native water rights is truly a drop in the reservoir.
Well, we've sort of acknowledged that, but I'm still curious, are you okay with going the other direction and not paying the storage fees and just allowing...
If I can answer that question, if I were, I would sell my water at that, and I'm not.
Dave, I'd like to clarify one thing on that price. When we were developing those prices for storage, there were actually 8 different options that were looked at, and the price range went from about that high down to some other lower numbers. And in fact, the lowest one is the one that Greg showed more recently on the slide there, were around 55 million, 54, 55 million. So it depends on the site itself. So it's a very, very broad range.
What was that low figure?
Around 55 million, and that's a smaller reservoir because of physical limitations at that particular site. It's a 7,000 acre foot reservoir instead of a 10,000, which is what the rest of them were sized at.
Right, and again, excuse me for, I didn't mean to exaggerate, but I'm pointing out worst case scenarios, and I'm also pointing out that the value, when we did this study, that was based on a smaller reservoir at a much closer location and we weren't even actually able to facilitate that realistically. But somewhere in the future, there is if we continue to take water that we cannot store and is not stored for us, we are going to have a liability for someone in the future, and that's going to be our customers. And one of the reasons that farmers didn't build a lot of reservoirs is because they're very expensive. We've had water flowing around, and everyone's known that stored water has a lot more value than running water. All you have to do is put a Dixie cup in the river out by our water treatment plant, which we only have one, and watch how soon it gets to Greeley to know that if you don't use it when it's there, it's gone. And that's one of the problems that ultimately we have in this whole philosophical argument of what is the real value of water. And again, believe me, I am so sympathetic to what we have done in this to the position you're in. I just don't see that dumping the burden back onto the citizenry.
The burden's already there.
Bought their water.
95% of the burden, David, is already there. It's already there. It's not like they're not getting, I mean, like we're going to take over the whole cost of construction for that. 95% is already in the figures here, is going to be paid for by the city somehow, some way. It will.
I'm afraid that in the entire water policy, that's not true. In where we.
Well, how can it not be true? I mean, just take the numbers. If you take what we've just talked about here, if it is $54 million, and if you do go back to and the city council says Scott's proposal seems realistic or reasonable, and we're going to not have this many dollars coming in through storage based on this ordinance, it's still going to be 95% of the project is paid for by the community. It always will be. That's how it is. Like Steve Fancher said, these are huge undertakings. And so it's not like the city people, the people of the city, are getting cheated. And when water runs down the river, even if you had all the storage right now, you're still going to have water run down the river. Would that be correct? At the end of I mean, you will not use all your water. Never will in any one year. And so that's always going to happen, whether you've got storage with it or not. But, this is getting into a philosophical discussion, and that's probably left for city council.
Again, I'll just go back to the other question, and that is that we have at least tried to deal
Well, you have.
with the storage fee because of the
firming up, yes.
But the firm yield becomes something that is a math, it's an arithmetic problem.
Yeah.
Of what it subjects you to as future liability.
Well, and the firming is like staff has said, this is what we would accept your water at per acre foot, this many acre feet. And, it's still not worth it to me to do that. So I'll just let my water sit there until something else happens, because I can't pay the storage fee. It's not worth it to me. So anyhow, that's
Thanks, Scott.
what I have to say. Okay.
Are commenters, anyone else would like? I want to read this into the record because this was an email that was sent to me as the chairman of the Utilities Commission at our request to get public comment, to get a dialogue going. April 3rd, 2012, Mr. Dave Schneider, Chairman, Loveland Utilities Commission, City of Loveland Service Center, Loveland, Colorado. Dear Mr. Schneider, I have received your letter of February 23rd, 2012, wherein you informed us of Mr. Scott Bray's proposal for rolling back and grandfathering the raw water storage fees to the dates the water rights were conveyed to the city water bank. Unfortunately, I will not be able to attend the meeting on April 4th to present my comments in person, but I wanted to take this opportunity to voice my comments and opinion on the matter. We, and this is Donath Partners number 1, LLLP, conveyed 3 shares of Loudon Ditch Canal and Reservoir Company to the city water bank in December 2002. At the time we made this conveyance, the whole water bank concept appeared to be a fair and equitable win-win arrangement for both the city and us. Now, however, with nearly a decade of hindsight, we would question why anyone in their right mind would have ever committed to such a one-sided bargain. Over this extended period of time, we have been at the mercy of the city's storage fee policies, as well as other city policies with respect to raw water satisfaction requirements, and have seen these policies totally erode the underlying utility and value of our water bank water rights. Mr. Bray's proposal to grandfather these storage fees based on the date of deposit to the water bank would at least provide some equitable recognition to those of us who made the decision to commit our water shares to the city so long ago. Adoption of this proposal would help bring some balance into our otherwise unbalanced and biased playing field. As such, we respectfully encourage City Council to adopt this proposal. Hopefully, I will be able to attend one of the future meetings to address the matter in person. But for now, these brief comments will have to do. Respectfully, David Sitzman of Sitzman, Michael and Company, Professional Real Estate Development, Management, and Brokerage Services. I want that in the public record. Again, any other questions or comments or clarifications? Okay, Darrell?
Oh, sure.
Oh, I'm sorry. Certainly.
My name is Dallas Benton. I live at 501 Sunny Slope Place. I support Scott's proposal from the standpoint of the storage fees being where they're at in comparison to what the value of the water shares are doing today. It seems to me like a percentage balance of those two. If the water price has gone down, the storage price should come down the same. That's going to probably create a deficit that is going to have to be made up somewhere else. I understand that. But to be equitable from the standpoint for the city, why should the storage fee stay the same if the value of the water is going down? So I support what Scott's trying to do, and I think it's something that council should look at.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Benson? Okay, I believe we've exhausted public comment. This is a learning experience. We will not be making any decisions. One thing I would, just for the sake of clarity, try to point out. We've had a, I think, an unfortunate tendency to blame all this on the city. This commission is not the city. This commission is actually a bunch of independent, contrary citizens who look at a lot of stuff, not all of which is so very easy and not all of which is so pretty. But I don't think when we analyze as a commission the policy recommendations that we make to city council, I believe we do as diligent a job as we humanly can and try to avoid the law of unintended consequences of our decisions. When we see a mistake happening, we try to correct it. We try to make sure of one thing, and that's that the increasing population of this city gets the utilities that we have promised to provide them in the most cost-efficient, intelligent, ethical, and humane way. So I'd hate to see continually pointing at the city council and blaming them for bias and other unfair things. This has been, interestingly enough, I consider this a team effort, and if we're damned, we're all damned together. But I'd like to have this audience understand this is the beauty of boards and commissions in general, is you bring the citizens into the process. And again, it's not always pleasant. So I thank you very much, Darrell.
Dave, I'd like to make a comment too. Okay.
Yeah. In the last couple of weeks, we've bought close to 200 more shares. Am I correct? 140 and then 60 more shares of Big T Water. First of all, I'll apologize for the complexity of water in Colorado and this novice councilman coming in here trying to understand the situation. I'm particularly keyed in on Steve Fancher's and Scott's proposal here in asking the question fair and equitable, where I hopefully always try to be. So a couple of questions. First of all, if we buy and acquire more Big T Water, does this decrease the size of the storage unit that we need to build in the future?
Yes, we have the gap that Greg referred to at the beginning of his presentation of around 2,600 acre feet of water. As we are purchasing these units of CBT water that you've
That gap is where those two lines cross up there?
yes,
Okay.
right. The part of the blue above that red line is where we hit that
There's a
2,600
point in the
acre feet.
future that we do not know where that is, but that's,
Yes, that depends on the rate of growth, but you know we've projected it based on the best estimates we have for growth here at this time. As we purchase these units of CBT water, we are in fact helping to close that gap, and doing so then would reduce the size of future storage that may be needed. You know, assuming that our demands remain the same as we reevaluate those over time.
okay, so I heard two figures from 55 million to 400 million. The cost of building the storage unit that we probably will need sometime in the future. That's a wide spectrum. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, and that's dependent on the locations primarily.
So, but we're pretty well wired into a location, aren't we?
We don't own one, but there is one that we would prefer, yes.
Isn't that the one that's coming down the pike to happen?
There's no purchase that's online at this point.
I know, but we've zeroed in on a location, have we not?
We've visited with an owner in the past, and they understand that if there's a point at which they're interested in selling, the city would be interested in talking with them at that time.
So nevertheless, the more Big T water we acquire, it is closing the gap and reducing the size, which could be reducing the cost from 400 million toward the 55 million. Do I understand that correctly?
No, there's two different things going on there. The difference between the $55 million reservoir that we talked about and something that's closer to 400 million really deals with the location of a reservoir. Depending on where a reservoir is built, it may need to be higher, it may need to have longer tunnels coming to it to convey water or pipelines and that type of thing. The most desirable option from a cost perspective is the $54 million cost that we've talked about, and that is the one that we have had the discussions with the property owner. Now back to the other question, if we're reducing the size of the 2,600 acre-foot a deficit that we talked about here, and we're looking at a $55 million reservoir site, if we reduce that 2,600 acre-feet far enough, then perhaps that 7,000 acre-foot reservoir that could be built at that site could be built smaller. The cost per acre-foot may be the same, may be higher if it's a smaller reservoir, depends on your economies of scale and that type of thing.
I think it would be worth noting, though, Darrell, that the fact that we're buying Colorado Big Thompson water still costs $8,000 an acre foot that our customers provide. So one way or the other, the customers are going to provide the wherewithal to give us our goal of the amount of water we need, essentially, that we perceive to build out, or the other concept we work on to establish goals. So the cost is still a cost. If we divert one type of water to another type of water, we still have to buy it, and it's got to come from somebody. And the mechanisms that we've done, that we do use, they're kind of well thought out and long planned, and so you do a lot of projection. But I don't want the viewing audience to think that just because we've bought Colorado Big Thompson water, which is the per acre price for firm yield is very attractive, but having a diverse portfolio and keeping our native waters in the basin, it still also has some value. So I just don't want to, that's not an easy solution. We can lower our gap analysis by buying more of one type of water, but ultimately, if we do that, it makes it almost useless for the city to have native water rights. So, again, I understand both sides of that. It's a kind of a teeter-totter problem.
Okay.
Anyway, John?
I just want to remind everybody that we could have been looking at this issue a lot sooner than what we'd planned on if the city hadn't have gone back. And Scott and Steve, you both know this. Back when the city decided to put in water meters, if you had not done that when it was done, this issue would have come up, not in the 2000 time frame. This had been in effect many years prior, and believe me, the water would have cost a heck of a lot more than what it is today.
Any other questions, comments?
Dave, I still,
Oh, I'm sorry, Darrell, I didn't.
there's a particular sentence or two in this letter from Mr. David Sitzman that is puzzling me. And I quote from the middle paragraph there, in which Mr. Sitzman says, and I quote, "At the time we made this conveyance, the whole water bank concept appeared to be a fair and equitable win-win arrangement for both the city and us." Now, after a decade of hindsight, one would question why anyone in their right mind would have made such a decision. I'd like to know and understand the exact reasons that have brought us to this table in this situation that we have today. What are the reasons? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What are those? I think I've heard them. The nation's economy, lack of building. What are the specific reasons, Scott, that has brought us to this dilemma, that has this change of mind, that at one point one person here says this looked fair and equitable, and what are the circumstances that now has this gentleman saying, how would anyone ever commit to such a one-sided bargain? Could you itemize those reasons for me?
I'd have to speculate on his reasons, which I can't do or wouldn't do, but I believe the reasons when this was brought to the city, it was by Ralph Molnix and Don Williams, who were the two forces behind this, and they felt that because the water couldn't be stored, that whatever water was being brought into the system, or whatever credit that the city was giving a share of Loudon or Southside or whatever ditch company it was, which goes back to each ditch company's historical records of what they're able to draw and what their priority is and how many feet that they are able to use out of the water or out of the river. But I think the city and when I say the city, I think it's Ralph and Don felt that the city was giving too much credit to the people that were giving the water to the city for development purposes, and that it needed to be reined in somehow.
Due to the lack of firming ability.
Well, due to the lack, you couldn't store it compared to CBT. Yeah, firming ability, right.
Okay.
And so,
another reason?
yeah, well.
And at that time, I remember I attended some of those hearings there. I didn't really understand it, but there was a lot of heat going on in this room when that happened. This gentleman at that time agreed with what the city did. Did you agree with it at that time?
Well, that was in 2002 when he put his water in.
That's right. No.
Yeah.
Yes, it was
yeah.
in 02.
So that policy was not being debated then.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that was in 04.
04, right.
04.
Right. And how and I can tell you from a personal standpoint, there was always fluctuation I don't know how often it happened when staff would review with the various ditch companies whether you were going to get 5.3 acre feet per share or 7.1 acre feet per share or whatever it was. There seemed to be not a lot of fluctuation, but some. And of course, the ditch companies were always fighting or wanting to get as much as they could for their shares as far as volume of water goes. So they would I guess, throw out the statistics of, well, we get all this water at this time, and it amounts to actually more than what you're actually receiving technically. Is that true? I mean, that the ditch companies get more water in essence than through the free water system and what have you?
If I'm understanding what you're asking, it's true that the ditch.
I'm not sure I understand what I'm asking.
It is true that the ditches will receive more water than the city will, because anytime the city acquires water and then changes it for municipal use, we have to remove it from the ditch. And to do that, we have to leave enough of what we're removing in the ditch to provide what's referred to as shrink. But it basically carries the rest of the water that remains in the ditch so that the remaining shareholders are not injured.
Okay. So, but there would be, and that was maybe part of the market situation. You could own a south side share, and this year it's yielding 9.3 acre feet, and the city may change their policy and say, all right, we're going to bring it down to 8.7 for whatever reason. So
maybe I could add just a thought to what you're describing there. For quite a few years, many years in fact, the city had an ongoing basis of using a 20-year average and would periodically update that number. And so when those updates occurred, there would be differences in the yields that were recognized. And all of the calculations that were done were based on records that the state has kept of the diversions.
Yeah. So that there would be fluctuation in that. But we as people that put water into the water bank, as that gentleman was saying, we knew what the policy was. We knew it may change, as far as the yields go. And that was the risk that you take. And the $450 storage fee, when that came in, was even a kind of a blow to a lot of people's, well, I don't know if I want to put my water in the water bank at $450, but I don't think it slowed it down a whole lot because our economy was pretty good. But the way it is now, I would almost bet the bank that you're not going to get any more native ditch rights submitted to the city in the water bank with this policy.
Mm-hmm. I'm still trying to identify
for reasons.
This gentleman, whatever the reasons are, I want to clearly identify them in my mind. This gentleman, quoting again, the concept appeared to be fair and equitable. He looks at it in reverse and says, who in his right mind would do this?
Do it today.
What caused this change of mind? Whatever those reasons are.
Storage fees. It's real simple. The storage fees.
But those storage fees, well, when this gentleman submitted, the storage fees weren't there.
Well, no, he had either $50 or $450. When did?
It was $400 for about 2 years, 95, 97, and then it went to $475, and it stayed there until January 1, 2006.
Okay, so there was when he put his water in, there was a $450 storage fee per acre foot.
And he wasn't grandfathered.
No, nobody was.
So then when he was going to take it out and use it, he would pay whatever fee.
He would pay $450 or $475, whatever it was.
Are there any other reasons? One, if I heard you correctly, I had one transaction where I had a little bit of water. It turns out I had a lot of water and I didn't know it. I gave it to the city. But at that time, it was, I think, about 42 acre feet of water, and the city discounted it when they accepted it into the water bank. And that discount, I think, was 10% or 15%.
15 is typical.
Okay, 15. So if I heard you correctly, you also didn't get enough credit for what you submitted into the...
No.
It was discounted somehow.
No.
Wasn't it?
No. I get, you know, they,
Mine was.
I can't count on it.
Do you agree with the concept of the need, of the difference in values in water and the need to somehow be addressing the problem of firming? In other words, making certain water available to our citizenry on a year-round basis, which native waters are not. Do you agree with that concept, which it seems to me this whole argument is based on?
Firming is a new concept to me. The first I heard about it was last year when I was at that first LUC meeting.
Isn't that the basis on which Don Williams and Ralph Mullinex created this particular, that there was a difference in values of water? Not all water is of equal value.
Right.
Do you agree with that?
This is it. This is the
I can't disagree with it.
It's only available for 3 months out of the year, then in fact.
And only in priority.
And one water is available 12 months of the year.
12 months out of the year.
There's a different value.
Yeah, but that's usually reflected in the amount of water you get for that either inch or acre foot.
So when these storage fees came into being, if I understood what was happening,
Right.
it was to bring that value, because we have to store it, to use it 12 months out of the year, and to equalize those values, we had to impose these storage fees.
That would be their argument, and if that was true, then they would have charged $19,000 in storage fees, because that's what it costs to build a storage capacity. So if what you say is right, that they're trying to bring it into equality, then it would have been, they would have charged $19,000 an acre foot.
Let's be clear why that happened, though.
What was being attempted in 2005 was to bring the total cost to the developer, from the developer's perspective, to the same point, regardless of the type of water that was being used, recognizing that what you're saying is correct. The value of the water is different. A ditch that's available only 2 or 3 months in some cases, or maybe 5 months for a more senior ditch, still doesn't provide water on a year-round basis. And for many years, the city's credits gave the same credit for an acre foot from one of those sources as an acre foot of stored water from the CBT system. So what was changing was a recognition of the fact that this water that was from the irrigation sources, from the irrigation ditches, doesn't have the same characteristics as water that's available year-round. So it's worth less, and so there was then looking at, okay, how much does it really cost to store that and make it so that either one provides what we refer to as a firm yield acre foot of water, something that you can depend on not only year-round but in a drought. And we found out that the prices, as Scott said, was around $19,000 an acre foot for the storage to provide that firm yield from the irrigation sources, and it varied some by ditch depending on the seniority of the ditch. But CBT water was at that time $11,000, and what was done then was said, rather than look at $19,000, because obviously that very high price has the dampening impact on the raw water market, let's make the price the same to the developer, whether they're using a stored acre foot of water from the Colorado Big Townsend project, or paying as cash in lieu that we can buy units from the Colorado Big Townsend project with, or bringing native water that needs to be stored. So it was movement in the direction of paying for storage, recognizing at the time that it was not enough.
Yeah, that, and I'd like to add to that too, since I sat in on so much of those discussions and the debate that went on. The commission understood that $19,000, $18,000, that was such a burdensome, such a harsh penalty. but it still reflected what we found out in the math based on what we were studying to the liability that the citizens were going to face as a group, as customers. And ultimately, the political decision was to make that more palatable and bring a much lower rate, and we knew we would create, as you've described, a deficit that would have to be addressed later. And then also we, as a commission and as staff, through recommendations, got City Council to do an annual 1% fee increase to address, frankly, a minimal amount of that, but still some of it, so that we at least were trying to move forward and balance some of this potential with the hope, I think we all had, of finding some alternatives than just goring you guys as ox. I mean, I really believe that that's never been what we've wanted to do, but our job is to protect them other guys, those 70,000 folks out there. So, but I would ask one question too, just because I think you brought up a point that I'm not sure is true, and I don't really mean to debate it, but if we were just building a whole bunch of buildings and a whole bunch of houses, and we've certainly in this town, those of us who've lived here for a long time, have seen that go through some cycles, would the fact that you own ditch shares and then can convert them immediately to development costs and pay the storage fee be a little more financially palatable as opposed to buying CBT or doing cash in lieu in the first place? Wouldn't they tend to be more equal? And the fact that your business would, by the nature of the overhead costs of your business, be able to absorb that? You understand what I'm saying?
I don't.
Well, if we were, again, if the whole development community was rocking and rolling,
Okay.
and everybody had to bring water to the table,
Okay.
because the policy about growth paying its own way exists, and we're trying to perfect our ability to service our customers, would not, in fact, the value, first off, the value of your water would be going to climb, just like CBT would climb. But if you're going to use it right away, and you already own those ditch credits, and your fee equated to buying CBT as an overhead cost, wouldn't you still use them?
Well, I would probably use them rather than buy CBT water, because you're right, the storage fee would be less than that, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm not developing anymore. All my developments, the water's been paid for.
You said the scenario would never happen, and I just feel like in your case and in many other cases, certainly right now that's the case, and again, I'm more than sympathetic, but a lot of this, unfortunately, has to do with the utility of water. As your water has gone down in value, and as the dedications of native water have come into the water bank, we haven't gotten a whole heck of a lot of CBT or cash in lieu either. Your business is on life support. Now, believe me, these costs to you, I'm sympathetic with. And again, that's, I think, why we tried to evolve to a place where we give you firm yield credit.
And that's why we're looking for relief.
Right.
So,
I was thinking that I was going to hear reason number 2 that has brought us to this situation. If, in fact, the building had gone on, you put this water in the bank because you intended to develop and use it, correct?
that was my original intention.
So you wouldn't be here today if the market had continued on its pleasant way and you had used this, you wouldn't be here today.
If I've used it, I wouldn't be here today, absolutely.
Well, that's which I think would be reason number 2, that after the decade, if this gentleman had used his water he had put in there, he wouldn't be saying what he's saying today. Do I understand that correctly?
That would be, I don't know. I don't know the gentleman, so.
Well,
it's
I just relate to what you have just told me.
Well, again, I'm not going to sell my water with the present storage fees, and I don't know when I would sell it. Would we ever get back to the $14,000 an acre foot for CBT, $18,000 an acre foot for CBT? I don't know. I mean, if it got into that range of 11, 12, 13,000, that would certainly help, but I've never felt that the storage fee was equitable to begin with. So for me to answer your question, I would really be lying to myself by saying, yeah, I think you're right, because I don't think the storage fee is right to begin with.
We're going into kind of a dry year, and I'm probing for a solution. If your water was not in the bank and you just owned it, without having put it in the bank, and we're in a dry year, could you lease your water?
I could. Well,
you?
the city does. Yeah.
So you could do.
You don't get much
But
money
you
for
cannot
leasing.
derive a revenue source of it now because you gave it to the city.
Right.
Or
right.
put it in the water bank.
But I don't think the revenue's that great for leasing. I think it pays for the ditch assessments. Yeah, it's minimal.
There's a lot of revenues these days that are not great. A lot of them.
I keep hating. I hate to say that my proposal is simple, but it truly is simple. I rather than say no storage fees, I came up with the proposal that I presented, and I haven't liked them from the beginning. I didn't think they were fair. As I said, it's not the developer that pays for it. It's the person that owns the water that pays for it. That could be one and the same.
I was going to say that's you.
It could be. But right now, I'm not developing, and I don't plan to develop anymore. All my water on my development of Dakota Glen has been paid for. So I don't have any more need for water.
Can you sell it?
I'd love to sell it, but I wouldn't sell it and pay the storage fee.
To be able to sell it, you still got to sell it within the water bank.
Yeah.
So it's got to be a willing buyer who it does intend to use it as originally intended.
Right.
You really don't own the water. You have a credit for water.
I have credit for water, right.
Understand that?
Right.
And that's another tricky thing.
Yeah.
Nobody owns water.
Yeah.
State of Colorado's citizens own the water. You just have a right to use it productively with a lot of rules.
I have sold some water that was not subject to the storage fee, and that's the only reason I sold that water. So, and that was in fairly small amounts.
Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it very much. Any other discussion? Otherwise, this hearing is adjourned. And Steve?
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
During this? I'd like to say that I'm not a developer, and I'm not a farmer. I'm just a citizen of Loveland. I might have a little bit of water in the water bank that's subject to the storage fees. Any? I don't think so. What I see Scott's proposal is as a proposal of equity. And what I'm saying, this Mr. Sitzman is saying, he brought his water in 2002, before the storage fees went into effect. And now the storage fees apply to his water retroactively, and he thinks that's unfair. And I got to tell you, I think that's unfair. You have certain rules that you played by every year, and I support the storage fees. But I don't support making them retroactive to people that brought it in 4 or 5 years, 10 years before the storage fees were in effect. And Scott's just saying, to be fair, let's make the rules the same as when they brought them in. Let's not make it retroactive. That's all his proposal says. Let's be fair to all of our citizenry. Now, in the long run, the farmers' water is converting in record amounts to cities. But the farmer's water is not going to convert with these storage fees on it. Nobody's going to sell water for $200. I think I saw a number up there, $230 an acre foot. It's the farmers that are going to get stuck with this in the long run. That's who's going to pay, because the developers won't. There'll be no place to go with their water. That's all I had. Thank you. Any questions?
I have still another question. Forgive me. This novice, though, I'm in a decision-making Beg your pardon?
You want to address this question to Steve or
I'm just kind of throwing it out there. I want to take the example of Green Glade. Who paid for that?
Green Ridge Glade?
Yeah, Greenridge.
Well, the staff can explain it, but
I mean, here's a storage facility. It was built and paid for the day it opened. My
Right.
question is, who paid for it?
rate increases.
It was paid essentially 50/50 by fees and through the rates. So half and half.
And operating, the whole storage fee issue came up, as I understand it, when the council back then, John, I think you were there, that growth will pay its own way, which I think is a concept that is still in place with existing councils. And I'm hearing water needs being proposed by Steve, that, and our bond guy is saying it's fair to bond because then the people who are using it in the future are also helping pay for it. Now, I take Green Glade out there, and people are going to come in, it's paid for, and are going to be using it that didn't help pay for it. Do I understand that correctly?
The benefits go to any citizen. That's true.
Right. It's going to go to citizens coming in the future that'll benefit from that did not help pay for it. Okay, I just want to understand that. Thank you.
Anything else? This hearing is adjourned.